All right, good evening, everyone. We are just going to give it one more minute for people to join, and then we will start. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. My name is James Flattum. I'm on staff with the Front Range Passenger Rail District, and I'd like to welcome you to the finale, the virtual finale of our Town Hall series. We will be having a presentation, a live presentation, followed by a live Q&A at the end of the presentation. This call is being recorded. So for anyone who'd like to ask a question, who would like to remain anonymous, we'd invite you to send us an email at info@frprdistrict.com. I'll repeat that again, info@frprdistrict.com. I would like to turn the call over to our General Manager of the Front Range Passenger Rail District, Sal Pace, for opening remarks. Sal, the floor is yours, sir.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us. This is our 32nd town hall meeting as the Front Range Passenger Rail District over the last handful of months. And we're excited today because we are rolling out our delivery plan that the board has voted on and adopted, and is a key step in moving towards contemplating a ballot referral for building out the CoCo plan. And we're going to start off, though, with Lisa Kaufmann, who is the Chief Strategic Initiatives Officer for the state of Colorado. She's done just about everything in her career. And if you want to get something done, you want to partner with Lisa Kaufmann because she gets things done. To share, give a little update on the successes that we've had in Colorado and the partnerships we've had in getting intercity passenger rail moving in the state. So help me welcome Lisa.
Thanks, Sal. Thanks for inviting me on. Pretty exciting. This is the last virtual town hall before hopefully your board decides to refer a ballot initiative at the end of the month. I know you guys have been crisscrossing the district, meeting communities, which is an enormous attendance, and kudos to you and your team for all the work that's been done. I think I was brought on to kind of talk about the overall rail vision for the state, and really the vision for how do we grow as a state and address some of the issues we have around traffic, affordability, environmental and air quality concerns. So I'm Lisa Kaufmann. I have worked for Governor Polis for a very long time and served as the chief of staff for the governor, and really ran the state of Colorado from 2019 to when I stepped down as chief of staff in 2023, including managing the pandemic response for over 3 years, and focused on also getting preschool and free full day kindergarten done. So we did a lot in the first term, even with the pandemic. But when we finished the first term, we really did not think we did enough on affordable housing and expansion of transit and rail. And we, as you all know, turned 150 years old on August 1st of this year. And really, we started thinking about what a heady responsibility it was to govern through the 150th birthday, and how were we going to set up the state for the next 150 years. And really what was kind of clear on that is the need for creating a passenger rail system, not just front range passenger rail, but connecting into the mountains and utilizing the existing infrastructure that our forefathers built and really established Denver, established Colorado 150 years ago. And that infrastructure is still available to us today to think about the future and how we drive affordability and how we drive a better quality of life. And so when I stepped down, I took over a portfolio of special projects, which led to realizing that we had an opportunity with the 99-year lease on the Moffett Tunnel expiring January 5th of 2025 to partner with Union Pacific to ensure that there was freight continuity through the tunnel, but also that we established an arrangement to have passenger rail through the tunnel for the state of Colorado. So was able to negotiate with Union Pacific an access agreement for mountain rail. And we are moving full steam ahead on that project. And we expect passenger rail for that system to be up and running this winter. And then really then looking at how do we fulfill the promise to voters for passenger rail on the Front Range, and really kind of came up with a collaborative approach with RTD, Front Range Passenger Rail, in the legislature, in the whole executive branch, to create joint service and establish new revenue for not just passenger rail, but for transit, into new revenue streams that we passed in 2024 with the support of our legislative leadership. So really what passenger rail has turned into is kind of an all of government approach, all of state approach. It's been enormously rewarding to work with the local communities on the northern sub to work through the issues and get the starter service up and running. And then also our collaboration with the Class 1 railroads. I think as we think about why Colorado is set up for success, it certainly is because we've got great partnerships and relationships with our Class 1 railroads who are working with us every step of the way to create this passenger rail system, utilizing the existing infrastructure that is already there in place that just needs some upgrades and safety improvements to transport passengers on it. So have been lucky to serve as the state lead negotiator with BNSF to get an access agreement in place from Denver to Fort Collins. We rolled out a term sheet agreement with them to establish the first 3 round trips with them with minimum infrastructure improvements needed to get started. And just last week, we spent a whole day together, Sal and I, in a room having conversations with Amtrak on what that service could look like, and the exciting new order they have for new train sets to really modernize what rail travel looks like moving forward. So it's been great to be a part of this project and to help lead from the executive branch this project in collaboration with Front Range Passenger Rail and RTD, and partnership with the Class 1 railroads. I think Colorado's proving a really important model of collaboration and pooling resources and doing this in the most cost-efficient way possible to get moving. And I think that's really important because obviously I think a lot of Coloradans would like to see this happen, but they want to make sure that it makes sense for Colorado. And we are charting a path forward to make sure that it does. And it's fun to work with my friend Sal every day. I say I'm doing this work because Sal Pace, when he was a county commissioner for Pueblo, convinced candidate Jared Polis to run on a platform of Front Range Passenger Rail. And that's really propelled us forward. And we're really on the precipice of making that vision a reality. And it's been amazing to work with this team and on all of the locals that have been so supportive up and down the line. I'm going to turn it back to my friend Sal.
Thanks. What Lisa didn't say is she didn't say if she's grateful that I convinced Jared Polis to run on that. No, I think she is. She's been a huge advocate for rail, and she's not someone who grew up as a big rail advocate. She just believes in smart transportation alternatives and a better Colorado, and probably has done more for furthering passenger rail in the state than anyone in 100 years. So it's an irony, but we're lucky to have her. James, let's jump into the deck, and then I'll pass it over to you in a couple slides. So we are excited as the Front Range Passenger Rail District to be rolling out the delivery plan. It's part of our statutory responsibility to receive input from constituents before the district contemplates a ballot referral. But if you don't know what CoCo is, then you've been living under a rock, or you have a different Instagram feed than I have. But CoCo is connecting 12 communities with 15 stations on 190 miles of track from Fort Collins to Pueblo, 2 special event stops, one Northern Colorado Springs station yet to be finalized, and also helping to deploy a station in Trinidad, Colorado. Ultimately, a full build out of 10 round trips, and with starter service beginning in 2029, with because of Lisa's leadership and the governor's leadership on joint service to get that deal struck with BNSF, and every train removing up to 500 cars off of our highways. And how did we end up as CoCo? It's because of all of you and the citizens of Colorado, 25,000 people who voted on the Name the Train campaign. And Colorado Connector, or CoCo, came in first place. So the delivery plan, this is part of our statutory responsibility as the Front Range Passenger Rail District. Before we can refer a ballot question, we also have a statutory responsibility for adopting a detailed financial plan. And today in executive committee, the executive committee advanced a detailed financial plan that was modeled out with the assistance of Ernst & Young, the top public accounting firm in the United States, that will be voted on by the board on August 28th. At the next board meeting. But the delivery plan is showing a comprehensive plan for delivery, detailing stations, talking about equipment, about the ride, about what the service is like, where the stations are located. And the delivery plan is published in public, and we encourage everyone to look at it, to review it, to comment. We are accepting comments, and comments are helping to drive the board and the decision on referrals. So if you get a chance to check it out, and we're going to be reviewing some of the highlights today. James is going to really dive into it as a subject matter expert and one of the primary authors of the delivery plan. But you can find it and download it yourself at coloradoconnector.com/plan. And we think it's going to be a really fun read for everybody, but also really informative about what the Front Range passenger rail system can be like. So what's new with CoCo? We did a round of town halls in the winter and spring to help drive the delivery plan and the discussion. We've been doing stakeholder engagement and coalition outreach, work with communities up and down the Front Range, and we are continuing to do that through next week. As I mentioned earlier, this is our 31st town hall meeting, the final one that we posted. We've also been before city councils in 14 different communities, 13 different communities, including Trinidad, and discussed the plan. We have either resolutions of support, proclamations, or letters from chief elected officials in all of the communities with station areas. The delivery plan was adopted and published and receiving comment. And then the next consideration for the board is next week, next Friday, August 28th, a ballot referral vote at our August board meeting on August 28th. And so we are continuing to receive comment, and this is part of the outreach to share the information and to receive comment from folks as we move as a district to a board vote contemplation. So the vision of Colorado Connector, it's a modern passenger train network, ultimately planned to go from state line to state line. And it's something that we contemplate in the detailed financial plan, how we'll get there in the long term. But right now we are focused on Fort Collins to Pueblo, linking the economic centers along the Front Range, a plan that benefits everybody because, as we know, every rider is one less driver taking cars off of the road. We're doing it in a practical, pragmatic approach. So building on existing tracks and this relationship with the host railroads, the Class 1 freight railroads, Union Pacific and BNSF, is so critical here because it means that there's no need for eminent domain or condemnation. It means there's no greenfield development. There's less uncertainties, less risk, and a quicker and more affordable path to delivery. And we're taking a pragmatic approach using the existing tracks we already have in Colorado. And ultimately, it's about growing beyond the core, laying the groundwork for future connections to Wyoming and to Trinidad and onto New Mexico ultimately. And so now I'm going to pass most of the rest of the presentation over to James Flattum. And I think a lot of folks on here know James, and I got to say, one of the best hires the district made this year. And he's filled in so many roles, from helping to draft the delivery plan along with HNTV and Burdick English and CDOT assistants. But James was really the key driver and the conductor in that effort. But James has filled all sorts of roles and full of knowledge and energy, and we're just so lucky to have him. And his technical title is the Associate Director of Strategic Initiatives and Communications, but really he's just our utility player that can fill in every position. So James, if you want to take it over for the presentation, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks, Sal, and thank you very much for the kind words. This has been a massive, massive team effort, and I've been honored to have a role in it. So diving into the vision that Sal laid out, right? The incremental approach that we're taking. One of the things that is really important to us is that we're putting together a vision, not just a vision, but an actual plan for a project that is going to deliver train service for this generation of Coloradans. This is not something that is for future generations, for our grandkids, right? This is a train for this generation of people, getting train service kicked off as a starter service between Fort Collins and Denver as soon as 2029. So how are we doing that, right? There's been challenges that other states have faced in terms of delivering new infrastructure. And fundamentally, it is the nature of the approach that we're taking being a phased approach. We're not trying to bite off tens of billions of dollars of new infrastructure in the way that perhaps California high-speed rail has. We are trying to use the infrastructure we have and use it as much as we can and upgrade it and layer in the necessary infrastructure and only the infrastructure that we need to run safe, reliable passenger service on top of it. So we'll dive into this a little bit more detail in a second, but the nature of the starter service is a really innovative approach. One of, I think, the things that we need to be honest about, especially when we look at the northwest part of the Denver metro area, is that there was a promise made 22 years ago, right, for train service that extended north from Denver, Westminster, Broomfield, Louisville, Boulder, and Longmont that has yet to be delivered. And fundamentally, one of the things that we realized that we could do as a partner, and there was a really innovative approach that has been led by Lisa Kaufmann and the governor's office, is putting together a partnership to use the existing RTD Fast Tracks Investment Savings Account. Right, over the last 22 years, there's been money that has been going into this savings account that is required to be used for Fast Tracks expansion, right? The Northwest Corridor being the largest amount of mileage that had yet to be delivered, where RTD, the state of Colorado, and the Front Range Passenger Rail District came together to work with the owner of the railroad, BNSF Railway, to kickstart and get service going as far as we could with the resources that we had before we would ask the voters for any new resources. And the fruits of what joint service is coming together to deliver is a service that is not only delivering service significantly faster than what RTD thought it could do on its own, but also significantly cheaper than what RTD could do on its own. And the biggest nature of that and kind of the strategy that was taken is, how can we use the existing tracks to take us as far as we can? What is the maximum amount of frequencies that we could lay in before building significant new track, before building significant crossovers and all the technical pieces that need to be done to install new train service, how can we get the most with what we have? And that is the nature of what this partnership has been. So 3 trains a day between Fort Collins and Denver, 3 round trips per day, is basically the maximum amount of service that we can combine the recently created state revenue, the state fee revenue that came from SB 24-230 and SB 24-284. These coming from rental car fees and oil and gas fees, combined with that RTE pot of money to really kickstart service, get things moving quickly. And as a consequence of that, we've given ourselves a really strong groundwork for going to a full corridor vision. And what we've put together, and I think to a huge amount of time and effort that Sal and the team have been putting together, is a framework for where we can actually promise end-to-end service within 5 years of passing permanent new funding for the corridor. So even when we talk about going beyond joint service, beyond the starter service, making sure that we had a really credible strategy to make sure that no community was being left behind, that we were going to get train service going to everywhere that we could with the existing track infrastructure, maximizing that track infrastructure before we commanded some of the bigger capital projects to actually upgrade and expand the capacity of the tracks. So basics, kind of the key stats of the corridor: 190 track miles between Fort Collins and Pueblo, aiming up to 10 round trips a day between Fort Collins and Denver, and then 8 round trips per day between Denver and Pueblo. Top speed of up to 79 miles per hour. This is something I think, that comes up at most of the town halls. This is kind of a Rorschach test of kind of, do people think that that number is fast or impressive or not? Is that some people say, well, I drive faster than that. And the honest answer is, well, yes, you do. Maybe you're not supposed to. But I think the lived experience of so many of us on the Front Range is that there is so many periods of the day where people are moving at a fraction of that speed because of congestion, that despite really heroic efforts on a part of the Colorado Department of Transportation to invest in I-25, US 36 to keep these corridors safe and moving, we still are challenged by congestion. And to Lisa's point earlier about what are the values in terms of how can we use the infrastructure we have to open up capacity, to give people an option that actually gets you out of traffic, this corridor, this rail corridor being a key strategic investment for us to explore. Travel time, we're providing a bit of a range. We're not going to be able to refine this with absolute precision until we can actually start running some test trains on the corridors themselves in partnership with our host railroads. The equipment that we're targeting in terms of the first permanent new equipment order that we're looking at is intended to be dual mode in nature. The intention is we want to use the overhead electric wire infrastructure where that already exists on the corridor. And then in places where we can't deliver that, certainly not at the beginning, having the most fuel efficient generation technology that we possibly can to take advantage of the underlying infrastructure that we already have. Delivery targets, as Sal laid out, right, 2029 for this joint service partnership is light speed in terms of infrastructure. And that is made possible by maximizing the existing track capacity that we have between 2029, 2032 for end-to-end corridor service, and then the most significant capital expenditure to really upgrade the capacity beyond that to get to up to 10 round trips a day in the north. So from an implementation phase, I think one of the other honest things that we need to talk about as a district is, why should you trust us, right? Why is it that, 22 years ago, when RTD came forward with a promise that, did build a lot of infrastructure? I live at Denver Union Station is my neighborhood. This was a neighborhood that was created from nothing. We had a huge renaissance of that entire part of downtown. We built the RTD A line that goes to Denver International Airport, along with other infrastructure. But fundamentally, there were several key pieces that were not fully delivered, the Northwest Corridor being the largest amount of mileage of what was not delivered. The fundamental difference is approach. In terms of how we are looking at the existing infrastructure and using existing infrastructure to expand capacity is the fundamental difference, where we are working with the host railroads from day one. And this is, I think, to the credit of those who planned the district. From 2021, when the district was created, we've had 2 ex officio board members from both of the host railroads, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, BNSF Railway, and the Union Pacific, being the 2 private companies that own this infrastructure. And we have worked with them, or they have actually helped us define exactly what were the capital investments that were needed to make the train service reliable, right? We worked with them, we told them what our goals were, and they have been collaborating with us as true partners. And I think this is a huge difference when you compare this to potentially you go a little bit further back to Amtrak, right? A lot of Amtrak service that you see across the country today has approached their service from a right axis. They have relied on legacy regulations where they approach the railroads to say, hey, we have a right to use your track. Here's what we want. We've pursued something that is totally different, recognizing that we do not want to be adversaries. We want to work with these host railroads as true partners. And I think we've been doing that from day one. Another huge benefit, and this already has been laid, the groundwork has been laid for this in terms of the term sheet that we've already signed with BNSF Railway for the Northwest segment between Fort Collins and Denver. We have a framework where the railroad will ultimately be paid the full amount of money in terms of the operating agreement when our trains are sufficiently running on time. So we're following the best practices of some corridors in other parts of the country in terms of what is the underlying nature that delivers a corridor that grows, where we can increase frequencies over time and make sure that the service is running reliably. It's this nature of our agreement that is so important, that we spent so much time working on to make sure that we've got something that works for the Class 1 railroads themselves as well. This is something that RTD, when they made their promises back in 2004, in terms of what the vision was, they didn't have nearly the same level of resolution about what the underlying infrastructure was required. That was a basic. That is already included in our underlying plan and our partnership with the host railroads. So this graphic here kind of walks through the phasing in a visual way. I think this just kind of simplifies it for us, right? Where phase one, the starter service using existing revenue before asking the voters for any new resources, starter service Fort Collins to Denver, 3 round trips per day. To go beyond those 3 round trips, we do need permanent new revenue. And that's where with phase two, the intention is within, if a ballot question is referred, right, and the board, as Sal said, right, is going to be reviewing this question next week on Friday. If they refer the ballot and the public were to authorize it, within 5 years of that authorization, we would be able to have entire, top to bottom corridor and service. And then over the next 15 years after that, incrementally expanding over time. So we're going to give you a little bit more information here about the funding sources, right? Because I think really important credit needs to be given to RTD for really coming into this as a partner. The joint service and the starter service phase one concept is a partnership. Almost half of the capital investment is coming from RTD. So RTD is the majority of its Fast Track's investment savings account is being allocated toward this project and this proposal. But what's also really important is the operating costs. You look how it's split between 3 entities. What this is functionally doing is making this approach significantly cheaper for RTD to collaborate with than if they had tried to go in and do this by themselves. We're basically cutting their costs almost in third. The RTD district only extends from Longmont into Denver, so we're going a little bit beyond that to Loveland and Fort Collins, but meaningfully lowering the requirements for RTD to kickstart service as a partner on this corridor. Also should mention there is no federal funds that we are contemplating in order to get this going. No federal dollars are being relied upon for this starter service. And then for phase two, right, where this assumes we do go to the voters with an ask for permanent new funding. Now, the board is going to be receiving a recommendation from General Manager Pace. And what we are modeling as staff today is a 0.333% sales tax. This is about 1/3 of a penny on every dollar purchase. And the intention and the strategy is deliberately, we want to keep the ask to voters as low as possible in order to still deliver a robust and reliable train service that is expandable. So what you can see here is this would generate just a little shy of $300 million per year. So for phase two, and roughly speaking, every phase is measured in about 5 years is what we model. But when we go beyond phase two, beyond where we've already initiated service for the full corridor within 5 years of passing permanent funding, phases 3 through 5 is where we make the biggest capital investments in terms of the track infrastructure. This is where we're building those additional sections of double track, longer sidings, the crossovers, all these technical things that we need to be able to build to run those higher frequencies reliably. And you can see that the capital cost does jump up a bit here, but it's also important to remember that this is over 15 years, right? These are 3 phases over 15 years. So it's still very much intended to be an incremental approach. We are biting off pieces of the apple that we can actually chew with the approach that we've put together here. So why build a train? And this is something that is, I think, really important for us to be able to be clear about and why we're doing this, why this is being proposed. Fundamentally, we've been listening to people up and down the corridor for years. And what we keep hearing is that congestion has been getting worse and that the costs of owning and driving are only going up. So we expect a lot of these numbers are going to be increasing, especially as gas prices get more expensive. But we've got really good data on just how much time is lost to traffic, how much excessive amounts of fuel that we're burning sitting in traffic, and what this costs per household. Almost $2,000. I think once we get the full data for 2026, given the war in Iran, this number is only going to be climbing. But why rail in particular, right? Why is it on 6 of the 7 continents across the world, right? Why is it that everybody, whether it's from Nairobi to Seoul, in countries that are bigger and smaller, coastal, more mountainous, denser, right? Why is it that everyone has invested in the same kind of technology? It's because that it's a multiplier, an economic multiplier. If there's one kind of nerdy stat I would hope everyone remember from this presentation, it is that on average, just in the US, on average, for every $1 that is invested in permanent transit and rail, there is a $5 economic return that is generated from that. 3 of those $5 are in the form of local sales. So this is a meaningful investment in local communities that is not just for the train service itself. It is serving the communities and the economic well-being of everyone in these communities. Is a huge job creator. I think that one of the really underappreciated stats is that there's recent evidence that's emerged in the last 20 years that actually for every dollar that is invested, more jobs are created when you're doing a rail project than when you're doing a highway and road project. So at a time when there's a lot of people who've observed that in Colorado, perhaps our job market has not been keeping up with the population growth, creating really strong jobs is a huge important value that we're targeting and that there's a lot of track record to back up. In addition, pollution and carbon, I think our state has got really impressive targets in terms of emission reduction. And I think just fundamentally train service being steel wheel on steel rail is significantly more efficient in terms of carbon emissions and also energy efficiency. And the biggest thing as well is in terms of household value. On average, whenever a household is able to reduce their car ownership from 3 cars to 2 cars, 2 cars to 1 car, usually because there are multimodal options available to them, that household saves $10,000 per year per car. So it's a meaningful investment when the cost of living have never been higher than they currently are today. Savings from this are really meaningful. But why the Front Range, right? Why is it that we think trains will be successful here? Despite the challenges with ridership that some of the local transit systems have been seeing post-pandemic, I think one of the things that we got to be honest about as well is the world changed, right? Fundamentally, fewer people are going into the same office 5 days a week that they were in 2019. But at the same time, with this additional flexibility, that there has been an unprecedented amount of intercity journeys, right? Outside of the metro area, discretionary trips. We've seen Amtrak, which is kind of the national carrier, the national operator for passenger rail service in the US, has shattered ridership the last 2 years consecutively. And when you actually look at the closest peer routes to CoCo, in terms of being a state-sponsored service, freight dispatch trains, more than 3 train services a day, we've seen a 30% ridership growth per year over the last 4 years. So a really meaningful amount of ridership growth as we can see an unprecedented amount of demand for this kind of service nationally. But then in the Front Range in particular, we can see that while there is no intercity service, no intercity train service that operates today, what we can see is that the bus routes that overlap with the CoCo corridor have significantly outperformed the base systems. So RTD's Flatiron Flyer that overlaps with US 36 has been growing twice as fast as the base for RTD over the last 4 years. And then up further north between Fort Collins and Boulder, the Transport Flex has been growing almost 20% per year for the last 4 years. But then when you zoom to kind of a longer distance, kind of corollary to Front Range Passenger Rail Colorado Connector, Fort Collins to Denver, there is an intercity bus service operated by Bustang, Denver to Colorado Springs as well as the South Line. You can see in that North Line over 40% ridership growth per year for the last 4 years. And I think what's also really important for us to remember is that this is still service that gets stuck in traffic, right? One of the benefits of bus staying is that even if you do get stuck in traffic, at least there's bathroom, at least there's Wi-Fi for you. But one of the innate questions that this kind of plauses is that, well, what is the demand for an intercity service that doesn't get stuck in traffic? That is the nature of the intercity service that we're talking about today. So from an experience standpoint, there's a few other notable things from an experience standpoint that differentiates CoCo and intercity passenger rail from other forms of transportation. So the first is just kind of looking at this picture, right? This is a picture of a train. This is a picture of the new Amtrak Aero fleets that are now starting to go into service across the United States. This is the basic. People, I think, associate kind of the 2x2 configuration of this with a first or business class cabin on an airplane. This is a picture of coach class that is standard across the network for intercity passenger rail. And the reason for this is that it's comfortable, it's more comfortable because it has to be, right? The train services we're talking about exceed over 100 miles in distance. So when you go beyond, like, let's say RTD, right? People might be familiar with the RTD system in the Denver area. The seats it's a little bit kind of more of a clinical interior, and that's because it was designed for capacity, right? They wanted to get the most amount of butts and seats from kind of the home communities of where people are starting to either an office job or maybe a Broncos game or a big sports game. They really wanted to focus on capacity. For intercity passenger rail, you have to focus more on comfort because the journeys are longer. So the basics of today, right? Bike access. A lot of people have told us up and down the corridor that they want to take bikes on the train. And what is beginning to be standard is that back in 20 to 30 years ago, they used to have to lug your bike to one storage coach, maybe at the front of the train for baggage car. Today, the standard is you have bike storage in almost every single car. Another thing that's really important emerging is ADA accessibility. One of the challenges that a lot of Coloradans have, particularly with the Amtrak experience, is that all of the long distance Amtrak service that comes through Colorado on the California Zephyr today, the Southwest Chief, right? These long distance services that go to Chicago to California, all of those trains were built before 1990, right? Before the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed by Congress. That means all of this experiences are in retrofitted equipment. People can still board, but it's a really clunky process, if we're being honest. I don't know if anyone in this call has accompanied a rider with disabilities, but it's a clunky process. The train pulls up, attendant has to get off the train. They have to find a shed. They got to unchain the shed. They got to walk over, wheel out a mechanical lift. They plug it up. They raise it. The rider and the mobility device can board. But it's clunky, right? The emerging standard with this Aero train that's currently testing and going into service now has got the lifts attached to almost every single coach. So from a dignity standpoint, from an accessibility standpoint, the ADA law, no matter what train service you see in the US, all of these train services are ADA accessible. But really today, and our board has made this also very, very clear to us as staff, ADA is the floor of our ambitions, not the ceiling of our ambitions. CoCo is going to be a train for everyone, and it is absolutely incumbent on all of us from a planning and implementation standpoint that we bring in a fleet that is totally accessible, that is going to meet the needs and give everybody a great experience regardless of ability. So kind of these basic amenities. One of the other things is you can see in this picture, there's a table, right? And one of the things I would defy you to do, either on a bus, and I really hope you're not trying to do it in a car, is that when you have a table like this, you can have a laptop or a tablet out, and then on one side, you've maybe got a coffee, and on the other side, you've got a snack, and you're able to enjoy all three at once, right? That is something you cannot do comfortably on a bus. I've tried, and I really hope no one is trying to do that in a car. For the safety of all of us. But I think, credibly speaking, from an experience standpoint, this is supposed to be providing all of these elements of comfort, but also providing them in a way where it gets you out of traffic. This is giving you an option that does not have traffic congestion, that does not have the complexities of parking in the most expensive downtown areas of Colorado. And I think it's also a really great opportunity. One of the things that those of us who've had the privilege of riding trains in other parts of the world is you actually get your time back. You get to use the time to kind of zoom or zone out a little bit, watch the world go by, read a book if you want, listen, watch a show. But also you can use this time productively. Get work done, get emails done. All of these options are options, fundamentally options created for you by intercity passenger rail. So there's a couple kind of, I won't call them wild cards, but there's new developments that have emerged since our project got started. two of the biggest things we just did not know about back in 2021, because no one knew about them in 2021, is that there are two new stadiums that are being built in central Denver. The first, the Broncos team is building their new stadium at Burnham Yard. And also the women's soccer team, Summit FC, is building a new stadium at I-25 and Broadway near the the existing RTD station. So both of these venues happen to line up almost immediately next to the corridor that we're working on. So there's still a bit more work that we have to do as staff along in concert with the host railroads to put together a design that is going to really work. But the ambition, I think, that has been laid on us in order to be able to do is work with the host railroads to make a really convenient door, open up a new door to both of these stadiums for people who are coming from outside the Denver metro area. And the ambition is to create by far the most convenient and comfortable way to get to these venues and get home safely. So milestones and in terms of measurements, right? How are we defining success? What are going to be the things that indicate whether or not our train is going to grow? I think the board has been very, very clear with us that we are to prioritize reliability in terms of the capital strategy, in terms of the physical investments we're making in the track. All of this has prioritized reliable service. We recognize that if I-25 is not reliable, US 36 is not reliable, if we're going to invest in CoCo, CoCo's got to be reliable. So the framework that we've been approaching from an infrastructure standpoint, from an operating agreement that incentivizes our host railroads to help us run trains on time is critical. In addition, the ease of use. If we haven't had intercity passenger rail service in Colorado since the early 1960s, a huge thing for us is we need to make it easy for people to give this a try and adopt it. That means that the wayfinding and the information has got to be absolute top quality. We need to be looking at best practices globally for this. The ticketing system has got to be intuitive and simple. We need to make sure that our trains are accessible from multimodal options as much as we possibly can, and making sure that from an accessibility standpoint, right, this is sincerely going to be a train for everyone. And then finally, from an affordability standpoint, there's also the recognition that while parking is really difficult in my neighborhood in downtown, there's other parts of the Front Range where you don't necessarily have to pay to park. So for people who are going to be looking at our service, it's not enough for us to just capture the people who've got a personal affinity for trains, right? I am in a network that has, people like trains, but we need this service to be competitive for everyone. We need from a cost standpoint, from a convenience standpoint. So we're looking at is Bustang and the Winter Park Express. Bustang being the intercity bus service, Winter Park Express being the phenomenally successful intercity train service that goes from downtown Denver to Winter Park Resort. I think when we've asked this of most attendees at our town halls, we ask, would you agree that the 2025-2026 ski season was one of the worst, in memory from a snowfall standpoint? Everyone agrees we've had a really horrible ski season from a snow standpoint. But the Winter Park Express still had record ridership again. So what we can see is that it was a great year for the Winter Park Express, despite the issues with the snow. And a huge amount of this has been having some of those recently passed state fee revenue have subsidized the ticket price to make the Winter Park Express more affordable to more Coloradans. And what we can see from a ridership standpoint is that has been a strategy that has worked. Winter Park Express is a smashing success from a ridership standpoint. And that comes back to us listening to our board of directors as carefully as we can. They have told us maximize ridership, prioritize ridership. That is what we intend to do as staff. So I'm going to pass this back over to our general manager, Sal Pace, to talk to you a little bit more about how CoCo is going to intersect with your communities and how we're working really closely with the local municipalities to get the absolute most out of CoCo that we possibly can. Sal, the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, thanks, James, and great job there. So CoCo isn't just investing in a rail line and into a train service. We're investing billions or over $1 billion into communities up and down the Front Range Passenger Rail District. In the delivery plan, the Front Range Passenger Rail District has rolled out a proposal where every municipality with a CoCo station receives guaranteed funding over a 25-year period. As I mentioned a minute ago, that's over $1 billion that will be returned directly to local communities over the life of the program. And the concept is the money stays local, The local governments decide how to deploy them to make the station work for connectivity, for ridership, for first mile, last mile, to ensure that every station is a success. It's a concept that we believe the local communities themselves will be more invested than a almost statewide district. They'll have better knowledge than an almost statewide district. They'll be able to understand their communities better. And that means that these local municipalities can invest in stationary improvements. That could be sidewalks, bike lanes, local transit, roads, parking, trails, and other first and last mile connectivity. And a train station, it's a board opinion that a train station shouldn't just be an island. And local return can help the municipalities up and down the district and the station areas build the connections that tie those communities to the station areas. And the best station areas are going to be those where they are encouraging and enhancing multimodal use, becoming multimodal hubs that transform how people live their lives, but also are inducing demand because it's so easy to use the train. And this is particularly important, maintaining local control, because every community is different. What Fort Collins needs around a station might be different than what Pueblo needs, or Longmont or Colorado Springs. But the investment for each of these communities will start well beyond just the train platform and helping to drive transit-oriented developments and communities and developments around train stations. And these dollars are more than just investing in passenger rail. It's investing in urban core and placemaking and providing for new downtowns or enhanced downtowns, creating centers of activity and pride in communities up and down the Front Range. So we're really excited about the local return program. All of the station municipalities have now passed resolutions, proclamations, or letters from the senior elected officials in those communities saying, we have signed off on the station area narratives. And in most communities, it was a collaborative approach where the Front Range Passenger Rail District worked with the municipal governments and the elected officials to tell this story about each local municipality in the station areas. And if you in the station narratives and the resolutions have ensured that each of the communities will get a 10% boost in the annual local return over the 25 years, which means more opportunity for placemaking, for first and last mile connection, and for transit-oriented development for each of these communities. And I'm excited. On our website, on coloradoconnector.com, you can go to the station page. You can see the station narratives. We're also developing and rolling out station area videos with all of the station areas. If you're following our Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, you've seen some of them start to roll out. All of those station area stories are also being uploaded to the website as we deploy them and bring them online. Let's go to the next slide, James. So what comes next? We've now done over this now 31 town hall meetings, or actually this would be 32, I think, because yours in Denver last week, James, was 31, with over 700 plus sign-on letters from stakeholders, organizations, elected officials, community leaders. We had the 25,000 people who participated in the Name the Train campaign. We have 900 people who are part of the CoCo conductors program. I'm sure a number of folks here who've been helping to be a conduit for communication, to share communication back to the district, but also share communication out to their networks. And we've seen in polling that 62% of the district currently says that they support the ballot measure or proposed ballot measure. And we're seeing majority support in all regions of the district, not just Denver and Metro Denver, but also North and South. And 2 out of 3 Colorado residents believe that they or the state will benefit from the project. So the go, no go decision, we mentioned this earlier, will be next week, a board meeting at the test tracks in Pueblo. That's August 28th. And the board is voting on whether or not to refer. And at that board meeting, there will be the final decision on adopting the detailed financial plan, but also on referring a ballot question. And that's our last opportunity as a district to refer. And so we're coming to a conclusion of several years of work. Even before this year, there were years of work on modeling and workshopping with the freight railroads and the Federal Railroad Administration to get us to this point. And so we're still receiving input and comment and engaging with constituents as part of our statutory responsibility as defined by the legislature. So with that, thank you all for sitting in and participating. This is amazing. 218 people, 217. We are going to be taking questions, but a lot of folks, over 200 people stayed on for 53 minutes, and that's really a testament to how exciting this project is. So James is going to be helping to lead the process here and call people in. So I'll let James kick it off here.
I shall do. All right. Thank you, Sal. And thank you all for joining us this evening. So what I'm going to do now is I'm compiling, you've all submitted, or quite a few of you have submitted digital questions. I'm compiling that. If you would also like to ask a question live, would invite you to raise your digital hand here, and I will go through the roster and I will call on people. So we did receive a question from Christopher about the future expansion. So Sal, this is coming from Christopher Rood. Christopher, if you are still with us, would welcome you to answer or to ask your question. Christopher, if you are still with us, I've given you the opportunity to speak.
I mean, you might need to click a button maybe to accept.
Yes, that is an important point, Sal.
Yeah. Well, while we're waiting, I'll talk about future expansion. So the district, it's part of our statutory responsibility to go from state line to state line. In fact, the district is the successor entity of a couple other prior entities. One was the Southwest Chief Commission. And I noticed earlier that Rick Klein, the longtime city manager of La Junta, was on here, who was a real leader in helping to save the Southwest Chief. And, a lot of the energy for moving towards Front Range passenger rail started with some of the work in southeastern Colorado. And so as we think about the future of the Front Range and about the opportunities for future expansion, the district is committed to future expansion. In fact, when we rolled out the financial model today, the financial modeling team and the accountants, Ernst & Young, helped model out in about 15 years where there could be some revenue available, 15 to 20 years for expansion beyond the current corridor. Also, I think there's an opportunity with future federal grants if they start to loosen up a little bit, where we could deploy future grants, federal grants for moving to the north and to the south. I also think at some point, I think it's could be a federal interest for further looking at the reroute of the Southwest Chief, which is one way of connecting, obviously, Pueblo to Trinidad and then on to New Mexico, and doing that in a way where you move the Chief from Lamar, La Junta, Trinidad, or Pueblo, and then down to Trinidad, so you don't remove any of the existing stops. So these are all possibilities for future expansion. We do know up to the north, there's a lot of interest and a lot of motivation for getting up to Wyoming and specifically Cheyenne. It's about 40 miles. The head of the Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce has been sitting on our board since we were first created and appointed by the Wyoming governor, as is the New Mexico Department of Transportation director for rail. It also sits as an ex officio member of our board. And of note, I'll say New Mexico DOT just released their long-term rail plan and noted connecting to the Colorado connector as a goal of New Mexico Rail.
All right, thanks, Sal. So we'll take our next question from Harrison Sokol. And please correct me if I mispronounced your name. Harrison had a question about Colorado Springs. Harrison, the floor is yours. Harrison, if you are still with us, I think you are muted. Okay, I'm not sure if Harrison's with us, but the question, Sal, is could you share a little bit more about the nature of the North Colorado Springs station? Is this going to be a special events only station, or is this going to be a full service station?
No, the board intends for this to be a full service station. And we looked at a lot of a lot of ridership modeling. And if you know El Paso County and Colorado Springs, a lot of the population growth is actually north of downtown Colorado Springs. If you know about El Paso County, it's the largest county in the state now. It's larger than Denver County. And most of the modeling, I think it was 97% of the rides out of Colorado Springs were headed north and not headed south. And so as we were looking at the modeling, we were losing potential ridership because Colorado Springs is long. It's a 30 mile long city. And so with a focus of trying to have maximum ridership and convenience for the residents, having a station on the north end of Colorado Springs makes sense. It's not a secret. We've had about a half dozen meetings with Air Force Academy. We aren't about to ink anything with them, so I don't want to imply that, but we're certainly talking about how to talk about it. And that would be an ideal location on the True North Commons, the Polaris private development. That's a long-term private lease on the Air Force Academy. Northern boundaries on Northgate would be an ideal location from a ridership standpoint. We are not going to button up the station alignment in North Colorado Springs this year. It's a lengthier process, especially dealing with the U.S. military. But we continue to work on it, and the board has taken a position that it's a goal to have a station in North Colorado Springs.
All right, thanks, Sal. Our next question is from Elijah Sanchez, and this is a live question. Elijah, if you are still with us, the floor is yours. Elijah, if you are speaking, we are not able to hear you yet.
Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yeah, so my question was, why is there no funding, federal funding, at least for the foreseeable future?
So
I noticed.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I noticed that this November there's going to be a measure on the ballot to increase the sales tax, as it's mentioned. But it also mentions that there's no federal funding, so I'm wondering why is there no federal funding?
So I'll be happy to take that one, Elijah. Thank you for the question. So the unique situation that we find ourselves in is we've got a federal administration that is not currently prioritizing projects in Colorado. Fundamentally, we have seen a shift, right? Previously, 2021, there was a national infrastructure program that was going forward. That money has slowed or has stalled in many programs. So I think what we're trying to be is realistic. If we're going to make a plan to deliver a project, especially given some of just the very valid skepticism that particularly exists in certain parts of the Denver metro area, especially in other places, that we can deliver on the timelines that what we're talking about. So for phases 1 and 2, right, we've explicitly explained that our timeline does not rely on federal funds. That said, a huge amount of the legwork that myself and some of our colleagues and partners at the Colorado Department of Transportation have made sure that we're, in terms of crossing our T's and dotting our I's on, is making sure that we are going to be eligible for future federal grants. So in terms of beyond, right, between now and 2045, which is kind of the end date for when we would expect to be expanding service, we will certainly be applying opportunistically for federal grants if we had an administration that was aligned with intercity passenger rail priorities. What you would see if we did that is mainly that we would accelerate the timelines, that we would be, with that additional money, we would realistically be able to install service far more quickly, potentially. So we're trying not to rely on it. We're going to be strategic. We're going to be opportunistic. And we are going to make sure that our program is asking the taxpayers for as low of an ask as we possibly can, while also promising something that is going to be robust and reliable. That is the nature kind of the balancing act and the careful balance that we're trying to make in terms of something that's going to be reliable and useful. Our next question comes from Sam Spicer. Sam, if you are still with us, if you would like to come off mute, the floor is yours, sir.
Hello, thank you, James. I was just curious if a part of the phases 3 through 5, the system expansion, obviously pending the budget, if full electrification was a goal, given that we're looking at bimode vehicles, it would just obviously from an environmental standpoint and from a operations standpoint, I would be interested to see what the sort of board's opinion and potentially just generally what the direction might be for that.
Well, thank you for the question, Sam. It is a really good one. The zero emission technologies that are emerging today is something that our board and certainly General Manager Pace and myself are taking very seriously. In fact, we are looking at hosting a couple think tanks over the coming months to kind of talk about some of those long-term ideas in terms of how we can transition to a fully zero-emission fleet. We want to make sure that we've got all the technologies on the table. You mentioned electrification in particular, and I think one of just the honest challenges that you have is that since overwhelmingly, aside from 6 miles of track, the rest of the 190 miles are all owned by Class 1 railroads, and they're functioning as an existing business today. Those host Class 1 railroads do not use overhead electrification in the rest of their business. So they have been hesitant to adopt the technology, not just because it's expensive, but just because it would be something that just does not exist outside of the Front Range yet at this point. So in order for us to expand overhead wires, we're mainly focused on areas of track, potentially at maybe some of the terminus points in order for us to recharge trains in the future. But all of this that we do on the freight railroad property has got to be in concert and approved and something that is ultimately workable around the host railroad's underlying business model. So we're going to look at this really carefully. We're going to be looking at battery technology as well to extend our zero emission range. But having something that is future proof that gives us options, right, for if we were in the future to come up with agreement where we could expand the zero emission infrastructure in concert with our host railroads, we want to give ourselves the maximum amount of flexibility to pursue that as seriously as we could. But thank you for your question. It is something that we are taking very much to heart.
We also, and James, I think we have a report soon to be released that's referenced in the delivery plan showing that at full build out that the CoCo Colorado connector will have the equivalency of 29,000 cars permanently off the road.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely vital context. Our next question comes from Julian Wang. If you are still with us and you can take yourself off of mute, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Julian Wang. I identify as a person with a disability, and I have a question. What are your guys' thoughts on the ability of travel training and capacity of learning, providing knowledge for people with disabilities, and has that been considered through the build out time to allow people and organizations like that to be able to do that? And then are there thoughts on how things can be more accessible for people with disabilities, like special tickets or passes or season passes throughout the year? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Julian. That's a really, really important question. I think there's a couple of pieces to that, but the first is in terms of special fares. I'm going to kind of take this in reverse order. Special fares for riders with disabilities. There are plenty of examples of that in other parts of the country. We are going to be looking really carefully at what Amtrak offers. Amtrak is going to be the operator for phase one. We're going to do an open procurement. So beyond phase one, for phases two and onwards, we're going to take a fresh look to make sure that we've got a competitive landscape. We're going to give everybody a fair shot to bid for that. But to begin with, there are absolutely clear cases for special fares for riders with disabilities, making sure that our system is accessible. So looking at that really carefully. In terms of where we can work really carefully with groups like for instance, the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, CCDC, other advocacy groups like Atlantis and ADAPT that have been doing so much important work, is making sure that we're plugging them into our station development process with our local municipalities. What's really important is that the last mile connections we recognize are going to be absolutely vital for whether riders of all abilities are going to be able to access our train services. So making sure that we've got participation in kind of the prioritization of projects to make sure that all of those really critical pieces of accessible infrastructure, there's certainly, we can promise that they're going to meet the letter of the law in terms of the ADA. But the other really important piece that we talked about a little bit earlier is that our board has made very clear that we need to go above and beyond. So in terms of the fleets themselves, there has been a considerable amount of national effort. So national disability rights groups have been involved in the refinement, a lot of the designs that are going into service today. So one of the things that I invite you to check out, just as an example, right now down in Pueblo, Colorado actually has the national testing facility where train equipment from all across the country comes to be tested. The current fleet that is down there being tested today is the Siemens Aero set, and this is going into service this summer in the Pacific Northwest. And that design was refined considerably over the last couple of years in concert with feedback from riders with disabilities and disability rights groups. In particular, the lift system as well as the design for the steps was refined over the last couple of years since kind of the version 1.0 of the train was initiated in the Midwest a couple of years back. So there has already been, I think, a very strong track record of being open and responsive. And I think we're going to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable, that when it comes to the connections with those local municipalities, we don't stop at fleet, that we also include really carefully feedback from local riders, local disability rights groups, and those local groups in those municipalities, those local cities themselves are absolutely plugged in to help us refine help us refine the project. So thank you for your question, and certainly would invite, if you've got other resources or groups you want to make sure are plugged in with our project, shoot us an email. We'd love to get you plugged in and keep the conversation going, because this is such an important topic. But thank you so much for the question, Julian. All right. Our next question comes from Rob. The floor is yours, sir. Rob, if you'd like to come off mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. I was wondering what the estimated departure times for the phase one Denver to Fort Collins route would be. Are we thinking like leaving Denver at 7 and arriving in Fort Collins at like, 9 or whatever, and then heading back to Denver for a noon departure, and then, that type of thing, and then maybe a 5 p.m. departure, what that kind of looks like.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. This is the part that we actually do have the most visibility to. It's the furthest along. The term sheet that has already been signed between the state of Colorado, RTD, and BNSF Railway have basically carved out three frequencies where basically during the time that that train is moving, this train is going to be the only train on the tracks. So what we can see right now, and it's going to be refined a little bit in terms of when it actually gets launched, is that it starts every day in Fort Collins. We've got one train set in operation, starts in Fort Collins, comes into Denver roughly for kind of the beginning of the workday, arriving in Denver, beginning of the workday, going back to Fort Collins. The second frequency into Denver leaves in the early afternoon from Fort Collins to Denver, comes back to Fort Collins. And then the final frequency in the joint service is in the evening, arrives in Denver and tries to give riders flexibility and options to have a full day of activities in Denver and get you home in kind of the mid-evening. I think as a member of staff, right, who I'm certainly super, I think I have perhaps been less plugged in on the negotiations on those pieces, certainly as Lisa Kaufmann was directly earlier on. But we do get questions about, why 3 trains a day, right? 3 trains a day is not good enough, right? We've heard that up and down the corridor. And I think one of the honest pieces is that we agree 3 trains a day is not good enough, right? That is why we've spent so much time putting together a framework to go beyond the 3 trains a day, because we also want to offer people the flexibility for a very late night train service to make sure that someone wants to come down to Denver, they can attend a concert, right? If Taylor Swift comes back to town, right? We want to give people a convenient way to get home. Additionally, right, recognizing that there's earlier morning trips that are going to be important for people who potentially have business meetings or medical appointments wherever they're going. So by the time that we do get to that kind of the 10 round trips a day in the north between Fort Collins and Denver, the 8 round trips per day between Denver and Pueblo, right, every incremental frequency that we add, we recognize that we're making the train service that much more convenient. So the actual details for the timetables that have been proposed are a little bit subject to change. But if you go to the Colorado Department of Transportation CDOT and you type in FRPR joint service and you just Google that, it's one of the first things that pops up. If you're not able to find it, shoot me an email. I'd be happy to respond to you with more detail on that. But all of these pieces are going to be refined with testing. One of the other questions that we do get asked a lot is, will people have to transfer in Denver for people who are expecting to start their journey, let's say in Boulder or Fort Collins, and they want to go to Colorado Springs? Do people have to transfer in Denver? What we're modeling right now is straight shots. What we're modeling right now is most of the train services, because there's a few more train frequencies in the north, but the intention is that most train services do continue on through Denver after a brief layover, that continue on to destinations south, right? This is in phases 2 and onwards, right? These phases are contingent on that new permanent funding source. But the intention is to not make people transfer. At least that's what we're modeling today. That said, right, what we're trying to do is preserve enough flexibility for ourselves to actually test this out and make sure that's working, right? Is that reliability piece is paramount, right? If let's say that in order to connect the train services, if we have portions of the corridor that are less reliable than others, right? We don't want to have cascading delays. So one of the things that you see in other parts of the country, I'd use Amtrak Cascades as an example of this, is that a lot of the train services they have don't go through all the way from Salem, Oregon, all the way to British Columbia, Vancouver. A lot of the trains stop, and there's a separate frequency that starts over in Seattle and continues on, and that's being done primarily because of reliability. So we're prioritizing reliability. We expect to have an easier time addressing reliability issues in the Northwest simply because there is less dense freight traffic up there today. In order to make the South more reliable, we're going to need to invest more infrastructure. And that's why you see from a capital cost standpoint, right, the phases 2 and onwards, right, get a little bit more expensive incrementally because we are layering in those additional sections of track to make the South reliable too. So we're going to be able to provide more detail as we actually start to initiate service in 2029. Once we've got a little bit more confidence that we understand exactly how long these different segments are going to take to operate in practice, actually in the field, we're going to be able to give you a little bit more color at that point. But if you go to coloradoconnector.com, we do publish some kind of draft timetables where people can find more information about if they want to start, let's say, in Loveland and they're going to Denver, you start in Boulder, going to Colorado Springs, you can see an estimate of roughly how long that's going to take. But thank you so much for the question, because it is a super, super important question.
Thanks.
All right, so our next speaker is Mary. If you unmute yourself, Mary, the floor is yours. I do believe you are still on mute for the moment, though.
Oh, yes. Hi there.
Hi, Mary.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, loud and clear.
Well, I think this is more of a rhetorical question, but I think in the ideal world, it would be nice if someone could take CoCo to Denver and then have aspirations of not waiting forever for the California Zephyr. But in reality, we know how difficult that would be. Do you foresee a future where the frequencies would be more substantial to Denver so that people who had any idea of connecting with the California Zephyr east or west could do so?
All right. Thank you, Mary, for the question. So I have ridden the California Zephyr before, and I share your sense of I wish there was more frequencies, for sure. So most recently, I took it, I think 2 years ago, from Denver to Salt Lake City. And that segment that I took, it was the peak of summer. The train was totally full, right? The train was absolutely full. We had a group of travelers who were trying to go on the same time. And people who tried to buy a ticket about three weeks before we traveled were not able to do so. The train was totally sold out. So I think that is certainly going to be mainly a question for Amtrak. When you talk about routes that are when you talk about routes that are multiple states in length, especially over about 700 miles in particular, those routes receive federal funding. So that is something that perhaps Amtrak would need to explore in terms of perhaps getting congressional funding to do that. But in Colorado in particular, there's also a recognition that there is opportunities to better serve the Western Slope. So one of the other projects that we haven't shared a lot about on this call is called Mountain Rail, which is expanding service over the overlapping corridor between Denver, Winter Park, and Granby initially, then later on to be extending new service to Steamboat Resort, Steamboat Springs, and Craig, Colorado, as an extension of new service to the Western Slope. So that would create overlapping service. It would create in the long run another frequency to serve destinations in Colorado as far as west as Bond. But I think that when you look at what is within the state lines, right, that is where we're going to have the most amount of flexibility, right, for the Front Range Passenger Rail District to collaborate, for CDOT to collaborate, for Colorado Transportation Investment Office, a clean transportation enterprise, right? These Colorado-specific institutions, right, to kind of take our destiny into our own hands and expand service. And to a huge extent, I think that's where an enormous amount of credit is due to the leadership of Lisa Kaufmann for putting together a framework that's kickstarted us on this direction. But I'm with you, right? As a transit rider, I spent many years in Colorado doing advocacy work, and expanding services on these corridors is something that I would absolutely love to see. And the hope is that the stronger we can make this kind of spine, right, from Fort Collins to Pueblo, that those cities between Fort Collins and Pueblo represent about 85% of the state of Colorado's population. If we can get this spine really reliable, the hope is that over time, right, we can realistically expand service to Wyoming in particular. Wyoming is super realistic from an engineering standpoint. It's only 45 miles. There's very little in between Fort Collins, right, and Cheyenne. And then services south, we did get another question about why are we not having our southern terminus be Trinidad? As much as we would love to get service down to Trinidad, adding the track between Pueblo and Trinidad is another 90 miles. So that's basically, that's longer than Fort Collins to Denver's initial segment by a considerable amount. I think realistically, right, we approach expanded new service to cities like, let's say, Walsenburg or Trinidad, really in concert with future connections to New Mexico. But as Sal was saying, I think to their credit, New Mexico Department of Transportation has put forward a rail plan where they do contemplate future collaboration with us. So I think in terms of what we have in our controls, the Front Range Passenger Rail District, if we can get buy-in, and obviously it's going to be up to the public to fund it, right? If the board authorizes a ballot measure, if the public was to choose to support that, and it was to proceed, having that spine, right, be robust. The more robust that spine is, the more credible, the more possible it's going to be, right, to have those extensions, whether it be all the way, all the way south to Albuquerque someday, maybe, whether it's, just to Cheyenne. We can be a lot more opportunistic in those cases if we've got a really strong spine to work with on the Front Range, if that makes sense. But thank you for the question.
I agree. It's just that Amtrak is notoriously unpredictable, so I guess we can't keep that on the table.
Well, I think to in all fairness to Amtrak, right? I think the legacy approach that they have with these long distance trains have followed that kind of right of access approach. It's a much older approach. It's functionally just a lot harder to do, right? You've got much longer miles, right? Well over 700 miles. Some of these corridors are over 1,000 miles, where each incremental delay can snowball. It's just being honest with it is a challenging thing when you have train services that go beyond 700 miles. But it's something that I've enjoyed riding as a rider, and we think is going to be complementary to CoCo, especially if you're coming from the Zephyr and transferring to CoCo. We think that CoCo is going to give people a whole bunch of new options, especially if we could get down to Trinidad, right, where we intersect with the Southwest Chief as well, for travelers who are going south to New Mexico or all the way to Los Angeles metro area in Southern California. We think that all these pieces are stronger.
That would be
right?
fabulous.
So in order to get there, because I don't want to get over my skis, right, in terms of what our priorities are, what we've phased, right, what we've modeled, getting that Fort Collins to Pueblo spine as reliable and robust as we can is going to be, I think, the strongest thing that we as staff and us who are advancing Colorado Connector directly are going to be able to do to lay the groundwork for a more robust passenger network over time.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. So thank you for the question. I am going to pivot to a couple questions that we got online as well here. Just a second. I'm going to compile this. So we did get a couple questions about what do you say to communities who have been paying the RTD tax and have yet to be given service. And I think speaking honestly, as a member of the RTD district, I live in Denver. I've got a lot of friends in Boulder. I think just speaking honestly about this is that, yeah, I feel frustrated. I would love to be having the option to take trains today. And yes, fundamentally, you go back 22 years to 2004, right? RTD did promise a service that ended up being significantly more expensive to deliver than they said it would. But I think to RTD's credit, a huge amount of credit is due because they are stepping up with the resources that they have to be a partner on this project. So I was in the room, and I cannot speak certainly for the RTD board, but I was in the room when the RTD board authorized the 90% funding for phase one, 90% design funding for phase one. And their comments were really collaborative in nature, is that they talked about the collaborative approach with the district. And there was an admission that they don't have the resources today to build the exact project that was promised 22 years ago. But when we take a step back, and I think taking a step back as a member of staff at the Front Range Passenger Rail District, I think the question and the productive question we ask ourselves today is, what is the most we can do with the resources that we have, right? RTD stepping up, and the slide that I'm sharing here breaks this down, right? Is that almost half of the capital cost for phase one, right, is being proposed to be delivered by RTD, having basically a third of the operating cost being covered by RTD. There's also, I think, an honest admission that RTD does face funding challenges right now. There is a funding scarcity challenge that their board is contending with today. But at the end of the day, right, in terms of this corridor that was promised, right, making this capital cost half well under half of what they expected it would be for them to tackle this project alone, and having an operating cost be roughly a third, right, of what it would cost them to operate by themselves. I think the district is coming together with RTD to go further together. And there is this recognition that this collaboration is setting us up to do that. So I think if there are questions that you have, I'd reach out to your respective RTD board member and ask them what they think about this project. I certainly don't want to speak for them, but I would say that as members of staff that we're really excited to be working with RTD. We've got, I think, a really positive relationship with them, as well as the host railroad, BNSF. We've gotten so much support from CDOT that we are so grateful for. So that's what I would say, is that to folks who would ask about paying into this for the last 22 years. Yes, our project is putting forward an approach to get to 3 trains a day that involves that money, right? The money that has been getting paid over the last 22 years to kickstart this and get this as far as we can with the resources that we have. But I think the reason that us as staff are making a recommendation to get to to go beyond this, right, to beyond phase 1, is that we've been hearing up and down the corridor that 3 trains a day is a start, but that is absolutely not the summation of our ambition, right? Every frequency we add makes this train service more competitive because it makes it more convenient. So that's what we're doing right now in terms of coming up with a program that we think has got a lot of promise, and it's going to be certainly up to the board to authorize a ballot referral, and it'll certainly be up to future voters to authorize that additional investment. But for those of you who'd like to spend more time with this and learn more about the project, I'd really invite you to check out coloradoconnector.com/plan. The hope is that this really is going to be your one-stop shop to really answer all of your questions about where does the service go, what does the phasing and implementation plan look like, what's it going to be like to ride, how much is it going to cost, what are the guardrails we've put in place, what does our approach look like. We really tried to construct this document that used to be basically a 700-page report that was designed for the federal government. We compressed this into something that is hopefully, that you're all going to agree, is significantly more accessible, more engaging. It's got much better imagery. The folks at the Burdekin and English firm here, it's a Colorado branding firm. They made this imagery look so sleek and so beautiful in a way that I could never do as someone who's got a finance background. But check out the plan. Think about this for yourself, and we're going to be open to criticism and to skepticism. I think there's been some comments already that have helped us shape our plan, helping us understand kind of where your questions are coming from. So if you have feedback, would definitely invite you share it with us. info@frprdistrict.com. If you go to coloradoconnector.com/plan, you can see this email address and how to get in contact with us there. But recognizing we're coming up against the top of the hour, just wanted to say thank you all again for joining us this evening. Thank you for those of you who are able to make it out in person to some of our town halls. It's been a delight to get to talk to you and share the vision of this project with all of you, and I hope you remain engaged and keep an eye on what our board decides to do on Friday of next week, because we as staff are so excited about the potential of this corridor. So stay involved, stay engaged. Hope you all have a beautiful evening, and wishing you all the best. Until next time, be well.